The cold came in off the river flats that morning, the way it always did in late October in that country, without warning and without apology, settling into the bones before you thought to button your collar higher. She had been walking since before the light came up properly, 4 miles from the landing where the supply boat had put her off, down a road that was more wheel rut than road, carrying everything she owned in a bag that had belonged to someone else before it belonged to her. The farm sat back from the road, past a line of spruce that blocked the worst of the northwest wind. She saw the smoke before she saw the buildings. Straight up, which meant still air near the ground, which meant the cold had not finished what it intended. The barn was large and banked with earth halfway up its walls, the way men banked barns up here who had spent at least one winter being wrong about how far insulation could go. The house was smaller and older, its logs gone silver gray with weather, but the chinked gaps were fresh, done this season, and the woodpile along the south wall was stacked floor to eave. A man who stacked wood like that was a man who had made peace with the length of winter rather than arguing with it each year. She stood at the gate a moment, not deciding. She had already decided, on the boat and before the boat, and in all the weeks before the boat. She was simply letting the look of the place settle into her before she moved forward. She knocked. She waited. The door opened on a man who was already wiping his hands on a rag before he had finished opening it, the habit of someone who was always coming from work and going to work and rarely anywhere in between. He was maybe 40, broad through the shoulders, dark hair gone gray at the temples. He looked at her, at the bag, at the mud on her hem from where she'd crossed the low ditch south of the spruce line. She did not let him get the first word. "I'm looking for work," she said. "I can cook, I can keep accounts, I can do whatever needs doing through the winter on a place this size." He studied her the way a man studies something he is deciding the weight of. "Don't need a cook," he said. "Got along without one." She nodded. She had expected this. What she had not quite prepared for was the flatness of it, the absence of apology in it, the way the words simply lay there between them like stones you would have to step over or around. "Then I won't take more of your time," she said and turned. Didn't say there was nothing. She stopped. The wind came through the spruce and moved the hem of her coat, and she waited until it had passed before she turned back. He stood in the doorway with his shoulder against the frame, not blocking it, not opening it wider, just there. "Winter road closes in 12 days, he said. "Maybe 11 if what's coming from the northwest is what it smells like. After that, no getting in or out until January, when the river ice sets solid enough to walk on." He paused. "I'm not looking for a cook." He said the next part the same way he'd said everything else, level and without weight. "I'm looking for a wife." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. "Got a spare room," he said. "Wood stove in it. No strings on any of it while you're deciding. If you say no, I'll drive you to the landing myself before the road closes. If you can't decide in 12 days. He glanced past her at the spruce line, at the sky going the color of pewter beyond it. "Then you don't. Either way, no hard feelings kept." She stood with her bag in her hand and the cold working through her left glove where the seam had split at the wrist, and she thought about the past 6 months. The boarding house in town that had been hers to run until the mine closed and the men left and the rooms emptied one by one. The letter from the bank that used the word outstanding in a way that had nothing to do with excellence. The morning she had locked the door and not been able to think of a single person in that town whose door she could knock on instead. 12 days, she said. 12 days, he said. He stepped back from the door. Inside, the house smelled of pine smoke and something that had been baking earlier and was not baking now. A clock on the mantel kept time in the way clocks did when no one in a house was particularly listening to them anymore, steady and without urgency. He showed her the spare room off the back hall. Narrow bed, a washstand, a window facing north toward the river. The quilt was folded down at one corner, pressed smooth. She had the distinct feeling it had been folded that way for longer than this morning. Not waiting for her specifically, but waiting in the general way of a thing, kept ready past any reasonable expectation of being used. She set her bag on the floor and did not unpack it. She found out about the lamp that first evening. She was washing the supper dishes when she heard him go out the back door, boots on the step, the quiet creak of the yard boards. A few minutes later, he came back in and she heard him in the kitchen, not at the stove, somewhere near the window, the strike of a match. When she came through to hang the dish towel, the room was the same as it had been except for a small oil lamp set on the sill, not the working lamp on the table, which was lit for reading. This one was smaller, older, its chimney slightly clouded with use, set in the center of the sill facing out toward the dark yard. She did not ask about it. She noted it the way she had learned to note things these past months, without comment, without assuming she understood what she was seeing, filing it beside the fresh chinking in the logs and the wood-stacked floor to Eve. He did not explain it. The hired hand was young, 19, she guessed, maybe 20, with the kind of quietness that comes not from shyness but from a home where quietness had been learned early as a means of getting through things. His name was Seamus, and he had been on the property since July and was leaving for his cousin's place in the Okanagan for the winter. He told her this the second morning over coffee, not as conversation exactly, but as information he seemed to think she ought to have. After that, he said little. He did his work. He ate quickly at supper and excused himself to the bunkhouse before the plates were cleared. He touched his cap when he passed her in the yard. She watched the man through the kitchen window while she worked. He moved through the yard with the economy of someone who had done the same things in the same order for long enough that he no longer had to think about them. He checked the fence along the north pasture. He split wood for the barn stove as well as the house. Once she saw him stand at the edge of the spruce line with his hands at his sides, not doing anything, just standing, and then he turned and went back to the barn without looking at the house. At supper, he passed things without being asked. He ate without rush. He did not make conversation for the sake of it, but he answered her questions about the road, the river freeze, the nearest town, with enough to be useful without so much that she felt talked at. She found she respected that more than she expected to. He asked once if the room was warm enough and did not wait long for the answer before moving on. She understood that the asking had been the courtesy, not the answer. On the fourth morning, she came downstairs before him and found the lamp from the sill sitting on the table beside the stove, extinguished and cool. It had been moved sometime in the night. By morning, it was dark and still, as though it had never been lit. She did not touch it. She made the coffee and set the table, and when he came in from the barn, he put the lamp back on the sill without a word, setting it in its ring of not quite clean glass, where the oil had spilled once and not been fully scrubbed off, and it sat there through the daylight hours unlit, waiting for evening. The woman from the next property came on the fourth day, Constance Rigg. She arrived on a horse that seemed to know the road better than she was steering it, and she did not pretend the visit was anything but what it was. She sat at the kitchen table with her mitts in her lap, and her eyes moving over the room the way a woman's eyes move when she has been asked or has asked herself to form an opinion of another woman's housekeeping and character at the same time. The swept floor, the mended curtain above the wash basin, the lamp on the sill in its ring of old oil. Been meaning to come by, she said. By the second cup of coffee, she had relaxed from whatever posture she had arrived in and started talking the way people talk in kitchens when the silent smux is warmer than the subject matter requires. She spoke of the boy. Cormac, she called him, 2 years gone in August, a fever that came fast, the kind that gave you no time to go for a doctor, and by the time the doctor came anyway, there was nothing left to go for. 5 years old. She said this carefully, not cruelly, but plainly, the way plain facts deserve to be said. The wife had left the following spring. Constance Rigg said this without judgment, the way you say something about weather. It happened, and then the season after it was different. She paused, turned her cup in her hands. You've noticed the lamp? She said she had. Constance Rigg nodded slowly. Boy was afraid of the dark. Not badly, not the kind that kept him up screaming, just enough that he liked to know there was light somewhere. His father used to go out to the barn last thing, and when he came back in, he'd light that lamp in the kitchen window, so if Cormac woke up and looked out his door into the hall, he'd see it. Know his father was home safe. She looked at the lamp sitting cold on the sill in the afternoon light. He still lights it every evening. She said nothing. She held her cup with both hands and looked at the window where the spruce moved in the wind beyond the glass. And she thought about what it meant to keep a habit past the reason for keeping it. About the kind of love that doesn't know what to do with itself when the thing it had been doing all those small careful things for is no longer there to receive them. Man hasn't had anyone up here since his wife left. Constance Rigg went on. Not till you. She looked at her directly then, the way a woman looks when she has decided the person across the table is worth being straight with. He doesn't ask easily for things. Whatever he asked you for, she paused, took him a long time to get to. That's not nothing. It's not, she agreed, and no more than that. Constance Rigg left before the light went, her horse finding the road home without much guidance, and after the sound of hooves had faded into the wider silence of the property. She stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking at the lamp with the afternoon light flattening on its chimney. 8 days left, 7. She had stopped marking them formally, but she knew the number the same way she knew her own breathing, without having to count, without being able to stop knowing. She found his shirts on the 6th day, folded on the chair outside her door. The cuffs were fraying and one elbow had been mended once before with thread that didn't quite match. She brought them inside and took her sewing kit from the bag, one of the few things she had not hesitated to pack, and sat by her window with the winter light flat and thin through the glass, and sewed the cuffs down properly and patched the elbow with fabric cut from the inside hem of a skirt she no longer wore. It took the better part of an afternoon. When she was done, she hung them on the hook outside his door and said nothing. That evening at supper, she was aware of him glancing once at the new stitching on his sleeve, and then not glancing at it again. Seamus left on the 8th day. He was gone before she came down, the bunkhouse door standing open and the interior swept out. She found him hitching the borrowed wagon in the yard. He loaded in silence, the movements of someone who has packed and unpacked many times and long since stopped second-guessing what to bring. She handed him his coffee from the porch, and he drank it standing. He said, "You've seen him light the lamp at night." She said she had. He considered the coffee cup in his hands. "First winter I was here, I asked him what it was for. He didn't say, just lit it again the next night, same as always." He looked toward the kitchen window. "It was the woman at the next place who told me. About the boy." He was quiet a moment. "He's not offering you a practical arrangement, ma'am." He said this carefully, respectfully, as though he'd been thinking about whether to say it and had decided it cost more not to. "Whatever he said to you when you got here, it's not only that." He climbed up onto the wagon, touched his cap. "Just figured you ought to know what you're deciding on," he said. "It ain't only land he's offering." The wagon wheels cut fresh lines in the frost, and she stood watching until the trees took him. She walked back to the house slowly. The lamp was on the sill already, lit, though it was still full afternoon, the gray flat light of a November sky that couldn't decide whether it was done with the day. He must have lit it while she was in the yard. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at it for a long time. The chimney clouded from years of use, the small flame behind the glass, perfectly steady because there was no draft here to move it. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and took the photograph from the bottom of the bag, where she had kept it wrapped in cloth since the day she had left. Francis. She had not said his name aloud since the town, since the morning she had locked the boarding house door for the last time and stood in the street saying something to herself she had not meant to say out loud. She looked at the photograph for a long time in the thin light from the north window. She brought it to the kitchen table that evening after supper, set it down without ceremony, the way you set down something that needs to be said before it can be put away properly. He looked at it, didn't reach for it. "That's Francis," she said. "We had the boarding house in Clearwater together 3 years. He was a good man, not a lucky one." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat with his coffee, and he did not fill the silence with anything. He did not tell her she would find her feet in time, or that Francis would have wanted her to carry on, or any of the other things people had been arranging and rearranging for her benefit over 6 months. as though the right words in the right order could unstick grief from where it lodged. Fever, she said, March, it was fast, 2 weeks from fine to gone. He nodded once. She found she kept talking about the boarding house and the way Francis fixed things with a thoroughness that made her laugh because he would spend 3 days making sure a door hung perfectly level when the whole building was settling crooked. About a dog they had briefly that hated snow and expressed this by refusing to go outside from November to April, which had made certain winters considerably longer than they needed to be. About nothing that mattered, in the way that everything that matters is made up of nothing that seems to matter. He sat with his hands around his cup and listened, and what she noticed was that he was not waiting for his turn. He was simply listening, the way a room listens, fully, without needing to answer. When she ran out of words, the coffee had gone cold in both their cups. He got up and poured it out and put the kettle on without asking, and neither of them said anything about the time or the hour, as if the evening had not quite finished with them yet. And they both understood that and were content to wait it out. 4 days, 3. She woke on the 10th morning to the sound of something below her window. Not alarming, the measured sound of a man working slowly and with purpose. She wiped the frost from the corner of the glass and looked down. He was crouched at the bottom of the porch steps, with a crowbar and a handplane working at the bottom tread. She had mentioned it once, in passing, over coffee a week ago. That step feels soft. I keep catching my heel on it. And she had not thought about it since. She had certainly not expected him to think about it. He replaced the board, planed the edge, tested it twice with the heel of his boot before he stood. When she came down to call him in for breakfast, she stepped on the new board and it held, solid and even and exactly level, and she stood on it for a moment longer than she needed to, feeling it hold beneath her weight. And she looked out at the yard where the frost was still white in the shadows, and the snow had begun to come down, the first real snow of the season, slow and unhurried, not yet committed to anything. The word arrived the next morning without her planning for it. She was at the stove when she heard him pulling on his coat in the hall, and she said without turning, "There's porridge if you want it before you head out, and I'll have something ready at noon, so just come straight home." The word sat there in the kitchen between the saying of it and whatever came next. She heard him stop. She turned the porridge longer than it needed turning. The fire in the stove made its small sounds. Outside the window, the snow was still coming down, steady now, the kind that had decided it was staying. He did not say the word back to her. He did not make anything of it. He finished pulling on his coat and said quietly, "I'll be in around noon," and went out, and she heard his boots on the new step, and then the silence of the yard receiving him. She stood at the stove after he'd gone and turned the word over in her mind, the way you turn over something found unexpectedly in a coat pocket. Unsure how it got there, unsure what it's worth now that you found it, home. She had not called anywhere that in 6 months. She had not thought of anywhere that way. And yet it had come out of her mouth the same as breathing, without permission, without her having decided anything at all. She was still thinking about it when she looked at the window. The lamp on the sill, sitting there in the gray morning light, cold and unlit, the same as every morning. She looked at it for a long time, and she thought about a man who lit a lamp for a boy who was no longer there to see it every evening for 2 years, because the habit of love is stronger than the reason for it. She thought about Francis, about the last morning she had been able to reach over in the dark and know someone was there. About how 6 months of waking up and reaching for what was no longer there had made her feel not just alone but unmade. The way a garment comes apart when you pull the one thread that was holding everything in place. She thought about 12 days, about the one that was left. She went to bed without deciding anything and lay in the dark listening to the snow move against the north window, and somewhere past the spruce the river doing the slow work of beginning to freeze. Morning came white. She woke to a stillness with a particular quality to it, the compressed, waiting hush of a world snowed on in the night, and not yet certain how to move in the new weight of it. She went to the window and wiped a clear place in the frost on the glass and saw it, 4 inches overnight, maybe more, still coming down. The fence posts losing their edges, the yard soft at its corners. The spruce across the road gone dark against a sky the color of old linen. 12 days, the last one. She dressed and came downstairs. The kitchen was cold, the fire down to coals. He was already out. She could see the light in the small barn window through the snow, the yellow of a lantern moving. She built the fire up. She set the kettle on. She did not think carefully about what she did next. She simply did it. She took the lamp from the sill. She filled it from the oil can kept on the shelf by the back door, using the small funnel that hung beside it. Her hands were steady. She set the lamp back in its place on the sill and lit it. The flame came up small and clear behind the clouded chimney, and she turned it to face out toward the yard, toward the barn, toward the snow, falling in slow, unhurried lines between here and there. She stepped back. She stood at the kitchen table with her hands loose at her sides and watched the lamp burn in the window. And the snow came down outside, and after a while she heard his boots on the new step, and then the latch. He came in, stamped the snow from his boots, pulled the door shut behind him. And then he stopped. She did not turn around right away. She stood facing the lamp and the snow beyond it, and she waited the way you wait after you have said something true that cannot be unsaid, for the room to settle around the weight of it. When she turned, he was standing just inside the door with his coat still on, looking at the lamp in the window, not at her, at the lamp. His face was very still. After a moment, he looked at her. She did not look away. The snow kept coming down outside, and the lamp held its small, steady flame between them and the dark beyond the glass. He said, "You didn't have to do that." She said, "I know." Neither of them spoke for a while after that. Then he said quietly, "There's a minister in Birch Hollow, 8 miles. He does Saturdays mostly, but he'll do a Thursday if you ask him right." She looked at the lamp in the window. She thought about the step he had rebuilt from a single passing remark she had forgotten making. She thought about 12 days and everything that had happened inside them without either of them narrating it. She said, "Then we'd better go before it gets any deeper." He took his coat back down from the peg he had just hung it on. She pulled on her own coat and her mitts and her hat, and he held the door, and she stepped out onto the porch into the cold and the falling snow, onto the new step that held solid and even beneath her weight. The drive to Birch Hollow took close to 2 hours through snow that was still making up its mind how deep to be. The horses worked steadily without complaint. He drove, and she sat beside him under the blanket he had spread across both their laps without comment, and neither of them spoke much, and the snow came down on the spruce, and the fields, and the river, somewhere through the trees, going gray-white at its edges, where the ice was beginning to close in. Once he reached over and tucked the corner of the blanket where it had slipped, without looking at her while he did it. Once she looked back at the spruce line until the road bent and took it from view, and did not say what she was thinking, and he did not ask. The minister's house was small and warm and smelled of bread and wood smoke. He came to the door in his shirt sleeves, surprised, then not surprised, in the way of men in small communities who learn early that the only things which arrive without warning are the ones no amount of preparation helps anyway. He called in 2 neighbors from next door to stand as witness, a woman named Blythe and her husband, both of them pink-cheeked from the cold and clearly pleased to have been asked. It did not take long. It was a plain room and a plain ceremony. A ring that had been his mother's, which he took from his coat pocket without ceremony and which fit well enough for a winter day. She said the words plainly, the way she said most things, and he said his, and when it was done he took her hand with a carefulness that she understood. Not hesitation, but its opposite, the carefulness of someone who has decided that this matters and intends to treat it accordingly. They started back before the light could fail them. The snow had not stopped, but it had settled into something steadier and less ambitious, the kind that has accepted what it is and is no longer trying to be a storm. She put her hand through his arm somewhere in the first mile, and he shifted his weight toward her slightly, giving her the better footing on the wagon seat, and did not remark on it. The farm came back into view through the spruce as the last of the afternoon lay flat and gray over the fields. The chimney smoke going straight up, the fence line holding against the white. And there in the kitchen window, still burning because she had left the wick high enough to last, the lamp. Small and steady and facing out toward the yard, toward the road, toward wherever a person might be coming home from. She looked at it a moment from the wagon. He was looking at it too. She knew that without turning. Neither of them said anything about it. They didn't need to.